What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are here with another episode of Get Ready With Me, which, if you are new around here, is my book club series here on this makeup-based channel. Essentially, I'm going to go ahead and get ready and talk about a book that we've all agreed to read together. Today we are talking about A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the second book in a series. We already did book one in a two-part video. If you are new around here, or if you haven't caught up on your reading and you'd like to see those, I will link those in the description down below as well. That way, if you haven't been reading along, you can still enjoy a story about fantasy world with fairies and bloodshed and romance and all sorts of things without actually having to have read the books. I think it's still pretty enjoyable. Most people who say they haven't read the books say they still like listening to the story as I do my makeup. So if that's you and you want to know what's going on before we get started today, the links to the first and second video will be in the description down below. So today we're discussing chapters 1 through 33 in A Court of Mist and Fury. There is not a ton of sexually explicit content in this particular video, although there is a lot of it in this series, which I always like to warn you guys about before I recommend the book. Today we won't be talking a lot about that. There is some violence and stuff like that, but nothing really graphic. The chunk that we read for this video is definitely more on the lighthearted side today. I will also be using the new NYX Modern Dreamer palette to create this look. Spoiler alert, absolutely love this palette. It performed so well and I had so much fun just like playing around with this arrangement of colors. Just like the last time I did this, I'm not going to be talking about what products I'm using while I'm using them, but I will list them in the description down below, and I'll put a title card up on the screen so you guys know what I'm using to create whatever part of the look I'm doing while I'm talking about the book. Please do not forget to leave a like on this video if you don't mind taking a second to do that, because it helps me a ton and I would really appreciate it. And if you're new around here and you've been like creeping through a few videos but you haven't decided to subscribe yet, let me just implore you to do so, okay? It's for your own good. I can't tell you why. It's a secret, okay? It's top secret. I can't tell you why, but I promise it's for the best. It's gonna be great. This video is gonna be pretty long, so maybe, I don't know, grab a cup of tea or a snack or something. I am literally getting hoarse from having talked so much. I hope I can edit this down a little bit because, oh my God. But in the interest of not wasting any more time, let's just jump right into this makeup look and chapter 1 of A Court of Mist and Fury. So when we last left off with Ms. Feyre Archeron, she had just defeated Amarantha and broken the curse that was plaguing the fairy lands while she lived with Tamlin for the last 49 years. Well, she didn't live with Tamlin for 49 years, but you know what I'm talking about. And when we left them, they had just arrived back home at the manor in the Spring Court, and we're going to try to get back to normal life. So where we pick up, it's 3 months after they have escaped from under the mountain, and Feyre is still struggling pretty heavily with the guilt that she feels from killing the innocent fairies. And the guilt, along with what almost seems like it could be some sort of PTSD, keeps her up at night and gives her nightmares. And a lot of times she winds up waking up from these nightmares with like heavy breathing, and then she winds up vomiting, and she's been vomiting her guts up, for lack of a better explanation, every night pretty much since she's been home. And every night when she does this, Tamlin doesn't wake up. And if you remember from the last book, she had a bargain with Rhys, and the bargain was that he would save her life and heal her, which he did, if she would come spend 1 week a month at the night court with him for the rest of her life. But it's been 3 months at this point, and so far he hasn't come to collect on that bargain. So since she's been back, Feyre's kind of been sitting around doing not much of anything, and not because she doesn't want to, but more so because Tamlin won't let her. And at this point, Feyre is no longer a human. She's high fae. She is like Tamlin and his people, and as a matter of fact, she's having a very hard time physically adjusting to her body. She keeps like breaking through glass doors by accident when she's trying to open them, and like bending the forks while she's eating. So at the start of chapter 2, Feyre goes to the stables while Tamlin is like getting his horse ready to go, and she tells him that she wants to go into the village to help with the rebuilding effort, because now that everybody's freed from under the mountain, they're trying to rebuild their lands and rebuild their towns. So much like everything else she asks about. Tamlin says it's too dangerous. Tamlin proposed to Feyre 1 month after they got back from being under the mountain, and he also brought in an old childhood friend of his who is a high priestess of the lands to help Feyre with the wedding planning and help her, you know, choose dresses, be a consultant for her because she knows the people of Tamlin's court. This high priestess is named Ianthe, and she is very, very beautiful. Feyre had always been under the impression that the fairy priestesses were like celibate and stuff, but that's not the case at all. And it's just kind of a shock to her because the way that she was told the high priestesses was more like a nun. So she's got an engagement ring. It's got like a blue-green sapphire thing on it. She doesn't like painting anymore since she's been under the mountain. She arms herself to the teeth every day, regardless of where she is and regardless of whether it would actually do anything to protect her against the fairies. And Lucian wound up giving her a nice dagger and a jeweled belt, and she wears that every day. One thing that Ianthe does a lot actually is flirt with Lucian. And Feyre notices that not only does Lucian not seem to be receptive to her flirtations, but he actually seems like he's taken aback and a little bit appalled by them. And as far as how things are going with her and Tamlin, Tamlin comes to sleep in her room every night, but he keeps his own quarters. And to me, it seems as if their relationship is mostly sexual in nature at this point. And Feyre even says things like, we spoke with our bodies the way we had always known how. So it seems like she's aware that their relationship is more like lustful than loveful at this point, maybe. Later that night, after Tamlin came back from wherever he had gone on his horse, after he said no to her going to the village, he goes to her room for their nightly lovemaking, if you will, and she asks him some questions. And one of the questions that she asks is, what will they call me after we're married? Because she wants to know if they're gonna call her High Lady, and she says that she doesn't think that she could handle it if they do, and Tamlin tells her that there's no such thing as a High Lady, and she's like, hey, what? But she lets it go because she says she doesn't really think she wants the pressure of such a thing anyway. So chapter 3 starts with Feyre talking to Lucian, and Lucian had gotten injured and had told Feyre that the way that he got injured was falling off his horse, which was not completely a lie because he did get thrown off his horse, but the way he got thrown off his horse was hunting the Naga. And Feyre is really upset that he deceived her and wants to know why he would lie. And Feyre is getting really fed up with being treated like she can't handle things or being kept in the dark about what's going on around her, because in the first book, when they were still under that curse, they couldn't tell her anything. Now they can. There's no curse stopping them from doing anything. She doesn't really like being treated like a child. Lucian tells her to try to give Tamlin some time to get over things and, you know, like heal from all of the atrocities that they suffered through. And she kind of gets that. And he says that she should wait until after the wedding and also wait until after the tithe. And then he explains to her what the tithe is, which is very similar to a tithe in a church, if you're familiar. I don't know if this is common anymore, but a lot of Christian churches used to ask for 10% of your yearly income to help run the church. So it's kind of like a similar thing. They have to give part of their income to the High Lord to help run the lands. Lucian also explains that if they don't have the money to pay the tithe, they have 3 days to get the money together, or they have to agree to pay double at the next tithe. And if they don't, then the High Lord, who is Tamlin in this case, has special hunting rights to go hunt them down and kill them. So chapter 4 starts, it's getting closer to the wedding. All the wedding prep has made Feyre feel like she's really thankful that she could never be High Lady because she sees all that Tamlin has to do to prepare for these things. So she's like kind of glad she doesn't have that pressure, but she also kind of just can't wait for the wedding to be over so she could rest a little bit because it's been a lot for her as well. They have a party the night before the wedding is to take place. Ianthe spends a lot of the time that they're there looking for a man to bed, pretty much. So the party's over, it's the next day, and it's time for the wedding. Feyre absolutely hates her dress. She thinks her dress is horrendous, but Ianthe had chosen it because I don't know, it would send some message to the people of the courts if she dressed a certain way or something. I don't really understand what kind of a message wearing a really ugly frilly dress could possibly send, but I'm no fashion expert, so what do I know? The dress must be really ugly though, because not only does she hate it, Alice kind of hints that she doesn't even like it, and Tamlin straight up laughed at her in it, so it must be really bad. Alice says that she looks like she's going to a funeral more than she looks like she's going to her own wedding, not because of the ugly dress, but because of like her attitude. And Feyre she starts to kind of hint that maybe, just maybe, she's not super excited to get married to Tamlin today. And the next thing you know, the doors swing open. She has to go downstairs and face everyone. There are 300 people standing out there to watch her walk down the aisle to meet Tamlin. And she starts having a full-on panic. She is so not having it. She's not ready. She's not into it. She's not sure. And she starts to like slow down and not walk toward the end of the aisle. In her own mind, she's saying things like, please somebody stop this. Please somebody help me. I can't do this. And just as she looks up at Tamlin and he starts to realize that she's hesitating, someone busts into the room, just appears out of thin air. Guess who it is? Oh, it's our good friend Rhys. Rhys shows up at this very convenient moment to bring her to the night court to fulfill her bargain. I mean, it looks like he planned this, and it makes him look like a huge dick. But she knows that she was gonna call the wedding off anyway. So even if he did do it to be a dick, she kind of owes him one. So all of the people who are attending the wedding are terrified of Rhys, especially Ianthe. She seems like extra uncomfortable that she showed up. We don't really know why yet, but they must know each other from the past. This whole time, Tamlin's guards, they've all been talking a big game about how they'll never let Rhys take her. They'll never let Rhys fulfill this bargain. But when he actually comes to fulfill the bargain, they don't do shit. They say no. They say you can't do this. They say you better not do this. They say you better dare not do this. But they literally don't do anything, and he just takes her. He sits there on his ass, just like he did the whole time they were under the damn mountain. So Rhys winnows them out of there, and what winnowing is, which they will explain later, but since they already start doing it at this point in the book, I figure I'll explain it now. It's a power that the High Lords and some other very powerful fairies have, where they can basically just like teleport, like they can leap through time. And the way they describe it, how it works, is almost very like quantum physics like it like is like a bend in space and time, and they just walk through it. Feyre is really scared to go to the night court because she has heard that Ianthe had originally modeled her court under the mountain after the night court, but when they show up there, it's actually one of the most beautiful places Feyre has ever seen. The palace, the manor, whatever it is that Rhys brings her to is absolutely beautiful. He gives her a beautiful suite, a beautiful room, and he makes it very obvious when she's there that she's not a prisoner and that she can come and go as she pleases. She's not his prisoner there, and that he's not her enemy. She's like acting like she's mad at him, but come on, like you were literally screaming for somebody to come get you out of there, and then he did, so you really can't complain. What had happened was he heard her screaming for help through the bond, through the tattoo from their bargain, so he came to get her because she literally asked him to, I guess. She denies that she didn't want to go through with the wedding to him, but obviously that's not true. So chapter 6 starts with her kind of settling in at the night court. She asks Rhys what he wants of her while she's there, and he says, for this first week, I just want you to learn how to read. He also wants her to learn how to shield her mind from people who are like him and can go into people's minds. So she has to work on that and reading for the week, and then he leaves and goes to take care of business elsewhere and just basically leaves her there for the week. She also gets to meet his cousin and close confidant in his inner circle named Moore. Her full name is Morrigan. We will see a lot of Moore as this story goes on, but I would just like to say, out in the open right away from the start, Moore is one of my favorite characters and I absolutely love her. When Rhys comes back from his business later in the week, she asks him why he's doing what he's doing, why he's holding her to the bargain. Even after she saved them all under the mountain, she thought maybe since she did that for them that he would free her from the bargain, but he says that he can't. Rhys also says that he's glad that she has to spend time with him because basically she needs time away from Tamlin because Tamlin just coddles her all the time and doesn't let her do anything. Hello? She even knows that? I don't know why she would argue about it because she said it herself and she was upset about it anyway. He also makes it very clear that he doesn't like Ianthe at all. like at all. Like he really doesn't like her. So he makes her practice her letters for an hour, and after every single time she writes the whole alphabet, she has to raise and lower her mental shields that he taught her to put up. And essentially, she finds this mental exercise very, very exhausting at first, and she does it really well, but by the time they're finished, she wants to take a nap. Like she is spent. Rhys also has like a really cool table map, like this huge table map, like the one in Game of Thrones that they have at Storm's End. He talks a little bit about like history and the war and all that stuff that he's been through in the past. And he tells Feyre that he thinks that war is coming again, and that eventually the wall between humans and fairies is going to be like destroyed. And she is really, really scared to hear that because she thinks her family will be in danger. And when he says that, she thinks that he means that he's gonna take down the wall. And she's like really freaked out and starts kind of like begging him not to do that and saying, why would you do that? And he was like, whoa, 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 I'm not a freaking monster. Like I wouldn't do that. That's not me. And he explains to her that the king of Hybern, who is the really awful king across the ocean, he was the one who was Amarantha's boss the whole time. He's the one who wants to bring down the wall. And Feyre's like, okay, this is all very interesting, but why are you telling me this? And Rhys is like, well, I thought that maybe if I told you, obviously you have a vested interest in this as well. Perhaps you could persuade Tamlin to be on our side and fight with us. Rhys at this point offers Feyre an opportunity to work with him and his people. He believed that when she was turned into a fairy by all of the different powers of the High Lords, that she received special powers and that she would be very important in the war to come. So he leaves her sentences to copy every morning and while she practices her mental shielding. But because he's Rhysand, of course they don't just say like normal things. They say things like, Rhysand is the most handsome High Lord, and Rhysand is the most wonderful lover a woman could ever ask for, which to me is so fucking funny. I think that's such a funny thing to do. He tells her that somebody has been attacking priestesses across the lands, and they're not sure why. And she also asks him about Illyrians. So Illyrians are a race of fairies who are warriors that have wings. Two of Rhysand's inner circle are these Illyrian warriors. Basically, they're like the fairy air force. It's day 7 and she is ready to go home. But she kinda hasn't really considered that she's gotta go home and face Tamlin now and the whole wedding situation, which is less than ideal. And as promised, a man of his word, Rhysand brings her back right on time. And when she gets there, Tamlin is very excited to see her. But he's super concerned about what Rhys did to her while she was there, and he like obsessively checks her for injuries. She immediately wants to go spend some alone time with him, you know, like some alone time. And he's like, no, I want you to tell me every single thing that you saw while you were in the night court. And she's like, are you fucking serious right now? Like that's what you want to do? And he's like, yeah, I kind of am. And he literally spends the whole night with her and Lucian sitting over a table, making her describe every single thing in great detail. He also keeps kind of thinking about the fact that Rhysand is hinting or flat out saying that he thinks that she has special powers. She asks if she does have those powers, can Tamlin train her to use them? And he says, why train you? I can guard you. You don't need to learn how to use them, which is rude. A week later, it's time for that tithe that Lucian had been talking about. And basically they just sit there all day at a big desk, and the people that live in the court come up to them and give them the money that they owe, until one fairy comes up, and she's a water wraith, who are like these, like, I don't know, like these scary half mermaid fairy creatures that live in the lake. And she doesn't have the money, and she says that the lake is completely out of fish and there's no way that she could pay. And Tamlin is in no way bending or moving the rules to try to accommodate her. And Feyre is like really kind of horrified because she understands what it's like to have been the person who's starving and can't pay for their own food or provide themselves with their own food. Feyre takes it upon herself to run off, and she gives all of her jewelry to this water wraith. So this fairy is super grateful, and she tells Feyre that her and her sisters will never forget it and that they're in debt to her, because that is how fairies work. That is fairy culture. Tamlin is pissed. Not because of the missing jewelry or anything like that, but he's very upset that Feyre undermined him, and they argue and they argue, and he gets super mad, and Feyre gets super duper mad too. And when she gets really mad, she accidentally jumps into Lucian's mind the way Rhys jumps into people's minds. So instead of going right to bed, she goes to find Tamlin because it's late and she hasn't talked to him yet, and she finds him in the study with a gift for her. The gift is a painting kit that she can carry around the premises. The problem is that she has not wanted to paint since they've come back from under the mountain. So she's like, ugh. And Tamlin is like hurt that she doesn't like the gift. She starts to explain that she feels like she's being drowned by him being so possessive of her, and he gets angry when he hears the drowning thing, so much so that he explodes the whole room around him with his power. When it happens, nothing hits Feyre, and she's like, wow, did he like have the forethought in his anger to put a shield up around me? But she realizes that that's not the case, that in fact she had shielded herself, which she didn't even know that she knew how to do. So after the whole explosion thing, Tamlin gets down on his knees and he apologizes. Honestly, it's so typical like abusive behavior at this point. Like, I really can't deal with him. But she forgives him, and they go up and they have a good old sexual physical time together. But in the days that follow, he eases up a little bit on the number of guards. He tries his best to be a little bit more lenient about what he lets Feyre do so that she can feel a little bit more free in his home. She wakes up hearing male voices outside of her room. Guess who is back? It's been a whole month, and Rhys is back to take her back for another week. And again, Tamlin says, "Get out! Don't you dare, you can't take her," but he doesn't do shit. She didn't really want to admit it, but at this point, going back with Rhys seemed a lot better. Now, Rhys knows that something happened because he could feel the surge of terror like through their little hand tattoo bond. He asks her what happened, and she says, "Just look inside my head and see for yourself." She's so like mentally and emotionally exhausted that she can't even like bring herself to explain it. Rhys asks her to stay and eat breakfast with him, sounding like kind of weirdly desperate about it. Breakfast, he asks if she has given his offer to work with him any thought, and she said that she's not going to do it. "Not only have I thought about it, boy, but I have decided it's a no for me, dog." And he says that he's gonna leave her there to do her lessons while he goes off for the week to do business. She basically spends it reading books and practicing. The end of the week, he comes back. He's got to bring her back home soon, and he asks her, "Please tell me what I can do to help you." He says, "Don't you care that you're just wasting away down there at the spring court?" It seems like she's just super depressed at this point, but she does open up enough to show Rhys her powers. She doesn't really want to go home this time. It almost is like she would rather stay at the night court, but she obviously feels like she has to go back. And Rhys tells her, if you ever need anything, like if you ever want something, if you ever need my help, or if you ever change your mind about my offer, I'm right here and you know how to get in touch with me, because they can talk to each other through the hand. She goes back to the spring court, and Tamlin immediately goes back on his promise to loosen things up and send less guards after her because some threat had happened while she was away. But at least now she can read, and she's really loving escaping into books, which is very meta to read a book about how great it is to escape into a book. Tamlin is gone for 8 days, but when they get back, Lucian notices her powers. He sees her accidentally growing claws and stuff. Also, he pulls her aside and asks her how long things like that have been happening, and she says it's the first time that the claw thing has happened. He says that he's going to try to convince Tamlin to let her train. So that night, she overhears Lucian downstairs talking to Ianthe and Tamlin about her powers and pleading his case about why they should let her train them. And Tamlin and Ianthe both say no, and basically that like if they do that, then it sends a bad message to other courts, which these two are like obsessed with the message that they send to other courts. Then there is suddenly a threat to the border, and Tamlin and Lucian have to go run off and protect it again. And this time Feyre begs Tamlin to let her come along. She just desperately wants to be able to be a part of things, and he says no. They argue for a little bit, and then he slaps like a magic ward around the house that's like a wall of air that lets everybody else in and out, but Feyre gets trapped inside. She absolutely loses her mind. She has a full-on meltdown. But because the high emotion is what makes her accidentally unleash her powers, she winds up wrapping herself in night and heat, and she like is invisible to the people around her, and she's like burning heat through her hands, and like all different sorts of powers are coming out of her. She melts the wedding ring right off of her finger into the floor. In her state of panic, she hears some female voices and she realizes it's Alice and another female, and the other female picks her up and carries her out and walks through like tons and tons of woods with her and takes her far away through a cave into another court. And she realizes in this process that the person carrying her is Moore, and Moore carries her across the border into another court where Rhys meets her, and then winnows them back to the night court. So she wakes up in Rhys's house, and Rhys is waiting for her to wake up on like a chase lounge or like a chair in the room. He looks totally exhausted, like he's been waiting for her to wake up the whole night or something. He tells her that she can stay there basically as long as she wants, that he doesn't care, that she can basically just live in his house for free. And she says, I'm not going back. So he's like, okay then girl, I guess you're staying here. So he tells her that he has to leave for the week again on business, and she says to him, please take me with you. And he says that she can come if she wants to, but if she does, then she can never tell Tamlin or Lucian or anyone else that she ever knows where he takes her, because it's absolutely top secret and she can never tell a soul. And she agrees. And she says, where are we going? And he says, we are going to Velaris. So Rhys winnows them off and they wind up in the foyer of a house. And she realizes that the house is in a city, which is very surprising to her because as far as she's aware, Amarantha destroyed all of the cities in Prythian. So if there is a city, then most likely it's completely in ruin. And at this point, there are people waiting in the foyer. It's two giant fairy men with wings and one tiny little woman. Rhys explains that that's his inner circle and that's who he's there to have a meeting with. She could go upstairs and get some rest and wash up and meet them later if she wants to. So that's what she does. She goes upstairs with Nuala and Ceridwen, who are the two handmaids that were helping her get ready with the body paint in the first book, in the Under the Mountain part where she went up to dance for Rhys every night. He says that this city is super safe and it hasn't been breached by an enemy in 5,000 years, which is when she realizes that it must be completely untouched by Amarantha. She's a little bit surprised at how casual Rhysand seems to keep things between him and his inner circle. She also asks them how the city can possibly exist because of what she had thought about all the cities having been destroyed. And Nuala and Ceridwen say that that's not their story to tell, that like that's Rhysand's story to tell. Later on, Rhysand takes her out for a walk in the city to show her around, and it's like a bustling metropolis. Like it's like the nicest place she's ever seen. She's never seen anything like it before in her entire life. Apparently the city happens to also be like a hub for art, which excites Feyre, but she also is getting like angry because she can't believe that these people just got to live like a nice, normal, happy life where everybody else was suffering under the mountain. She doesn't realize that she left her mental shields down and that Rhysand is reading her thoughts, and he says like, hey, wait a second, my people are blameless here, it's not their fault. And she says, yeah, you know what, you're right, and she starts to calm down. In this conversation, Rhysand also casually reveals that he's the most powerful High Lord that ever existed in history, but he explains that even though he's the most powerful Lord in history, the little lady that she had seen in the foyer earlier, whose name is Amren, is way more powerful than him, and he doesn't dare cross her. This woman is also 5,000 years old, which is super old, and they're all sort of super old, but she's 10 times older than the rest of them. So Rhys tells her that they're going for dinner with the rest of his inner circle that night, where she can make the decision about whether she wants to work with them or not, and she has to fly there because it's at the top of the mountain over the city, like it overlooks the city, but it is completely warded so that there are like magic spells around it that they can't winnow in. So all you can do is either walk up 10,000 steps, which he really doesn't want to do, or fly, and she is absolutely terrified to fly with him, which, oh my god, I would be too. I'd poop myself. Before they go up to dinner, Rhys offers her a thought for a thought, and he tells her that he never thought that he'd see this place again, and he's very grateful that he can, and also that he sort of wishes that he was the one who got to kill Amarantha. And she tells him in exchange that she thinks that she must have been a fool for thinking that she could possibly make it work with Tamlin, and that Tamlin would have worked for the old her, but that's just not who she is anymore. I took a quick coffee break. I went downstairs to get an espresso, and I up where I left off. Pretty sure she's just about to meet the inner circle. The inner circle consists of the 2 Illyrians, which are Azrael, who is a shadow singer, which means that he can like sense things and hear things that other people can't sense. And he has like all these like shadow creatures that like swirl around him and he can hide in them. Then there's Cassian. Cassian is the general of Rhysand's army, so he's basically just like a regular warrior. He doesn't have any special powers. There's Amren, who is apparently not actually a fairy. She is something scarier than that, and she doesn't eat real food. She eats something else. They don't quite explain what that is yet, but she doesn't eat food. And then there's Mor, who we already met. Mor is Rhys's cousin, but it sounds like she's a cousin in like the Italian American sense, you know, like when it's just like a close family friend and you call everybody your cousin. Mor seems like the absolute best. Like she seems like the girlfriend that everybody wishes that they had. And Amren is a little bit more cold and a little bit more like analytical. Feyre realizes that none of these people were under the mountain with them, and she's like, well, how is that possible? And she finds out that Rhysand basically sacrificed himself to be Amaranth's whore for 49 years in order to do everything he could to keep his friends and family and city completely protected from her. Rhys also lets them all know during dinner that the king is trying to resurrect Durian, who is the one who was trapped in Amaranth's eyeball ring. But they're not sure if that's actually even possible, and Amren says to find out that they have to go to the prison and talk to somebody called the Bone Carver, which sounds ominous and scary as shit. That night at the townhouse, she has terrible nightmares again, and Rhysand hears her and wakes up and comes and comforts her and pets her back while she throws up. And he tells her that he still has nightmares too, which makes her feel like much less alone. And hello, I mean, she doesn't just outright say this, but already he's done more for her than Tamlin ever did in this sense. Like, he's more supportive, and he ain't even her boyfriend. He's just the guy that she works for now. He also tells her the next morning that he sent a request to the summer court for them to go visit there, but he doesn't specify why. They attempt to go to the prison, which is basically like a giant mountain that's carved out and has all of these prisoners who are like super dangerous and powerful magical creatures who are trapped inside of it. And when they get there, Feyre can't bring herself to go in because she keeps panicking at the idea of being under a mountain again. And Rhysand is very understanding. He takes her home and figures we'll try again tomorrow. And then she sleeps the rest of the day and is very upset with herself. The next morning, to help her, Amren comes to her with an amulet, and she says that this is the amulet that helped her escape the prison, because Amren had been trapped in that prison in another form, like in a different body, before she became a fairy. So she gives her this amulet and she says, if this helped me and it kept them from keeping me inside the prison, then obviously it can help you. So with the amulet, Feyre feels more comfortable, and they go back and they actually get to talk to the Bone Carver this time. It takes them like 1 billion years to get down there, like so long. He asks a lot of questions while they're walking down there about what Amren is, and Rhys is like, basically, I don't know. Nobody quite knows what the Bone Carver is either, but they're both not of this world. Like, they got there from somewhere else and got trapped in the world that the book takes place in. And he explains to Feyre that they both might see something completely different when they look at the Bone Carver. It's not that he's a shapeshifter, it's that he really doesn't even have a shape, and he just dictates what he'll appear as to each individual person, like in their mind. So they get down to his cell and Rhysand gives him a piece of bone as an offering. So to Feyre, he appears as like a cute little boy, but she can tell that he ain't no little boy. He's very old and very much not innocent. So in exchange for the information that Feyre wants, the Bone Carver wants to ask her questions about death. So he asks her like what she saw when she died, if she saw anything in the afterlife, and she basically says no, not really. Once he's satisfied with that, they get to ask the question they came there to ask. So they ask him if it would be possible if somebody would be able to bring back a person from the dead who had been preserved with just their finger bone and their eye. He says that they can, but only if the soul was preserved, which basically in the case of Durian means yes. After After a few more questions, mostly about Feyre's death, Rhysand winds up asking him where the cauldron is. Cauldron is like where all the magic and the power in this universe comes from. And at some point, somebody took the cauldron and they broke the feet off the bottom of it to dampen its power a little bit, around the same time as it was being used in the war against humans 100 years ago. And around that time as well, there was a book written called the Book of Breathings, which was used to nullify the power of the cauldron. And the book was split in half. Half of it was given to the Summer Court in Prythian, and the other half was given to the human queens who rule over the human realm. And the only way to nullify the cauldron would be to get the two halves of the book and then read the spells from it while being in front of the cauldron. The half that's in the fairy territories, they can just go and steal if they can figure out a way to do it. So the half that's with the human queens in the human territories is spelled so that it can only be given by free will. They can't trick them, they can't use magic, any kind of theft or deception, and it'll just destroy itself. So they have to just basically convince the human queens to give it to them somehow. Rhysand kind of already knew all of that. He just needed the bone carver to confirm it for him so that he could be sure that he was doing the right thing, which is why he had asked for an appointment with the Summer Court, because he knew that they could go there and get half of the Book of Breathings and steal it from them. So at this point in the book, I swear, she starts using, and by she I mean the author, starts using the term a vulgar gesture so much that I can't help but laugh every time she says it. First of all, I can't decide if she means the middle finger every time, or if these characters are using a variety of hilarious vulgar gestures. At this point, everybody else is giving somebody else a vulgar gesture like all the time. It's just constant vulgar gestures. And it's something that I've actually noticed quite a bit in this book, is that the author kind of gets stuck on like one or two phrases and she uses them repeatedly. And at first, it really bothered me and it made me enjoy the story less, but now it's to a point where it's like so often that it makes me laugh, so I don't mind anymore. Other examples are his mouth was a hard line, he clicked his tongue, and my favorite is Lucian's metal eye word. They think that Feyre should be able to find the book at the Summer Court because of the fact that she has all of these High Lord's powers, so their identity is kind of imprinted in her in a way. So the book as an object of power should call to her, but there's no way for them to really know that for sure unless they test that with some other object. Rhysand comes up with the brilliant idea that they should go visit the Weaver of the Wood. The Weaver is basically an ancient magical hoarder. She lives out in a cabin in the woods and she has like literally just a trove of stuff around her. And she has an object that belongs to Rhys that she's had for quite a while. So Rhys wants it back anyway, and he figures that this is a great way for them to test if Feyre can detect these objects indeed. They went out to the woods. They're flirting a whole bunch at this point. Like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that they like each other, but she is like super in denial about it because she's like guilty about the Tamlin thing. Girl, he was like a violent douchebag. You don't need to feel bad, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. She feels bad. The Weaver is blind, but her other senses are still very, very sharp. So as long as Feyre is pretty quiet, she should be able to get in and out of there with the object. She does sense the object and she finds it on a shelf, but as she goes to pick it up, the Weaver stops singing. She had been sitting there weaving at her loom and humming and singing, and as soon as Feyre picks up the object, she stops. She can sense her. The Weaver shuts the doors and traps Feyre inside, and the only way for her to get out is to climb through the chimney. So Feyre climbs up the chimney and it's covered in like disgusting grease, which she realizes is actually boiled people fat, and that the Weaver isn't weaving yarn at all, but it's just strands of dead people's hair that she's weaving on this loom. Understandably, Feyre is freaked the hell out, so she tries to scramble up the chimney, but she gets stuck, and when she gets to the top, she panics, and Rhysand pops into her head and tells her, "You're really strong, use your strength and power to get out." So she pulls a brick out of the chimney and throws it down and smashes the weaver in the face. And then she eventually realizes how strong she is indeed and smashes through the bricks. She gets out, she jumps through the trees, Rhys is waiting for her, and then they winnow back to the house and they're like, yay, she can detect the objects. Also, when she got out of the chimney, the roof was also thatched with hair instead of straw. Ooh. She's talking to Amren, and Amren brings up that she's really surprised that Ianthe never had Feyre train her gifts, and Rhys again shows like super disdain for Ianthe. And Feyre's like, dude, what is your issue with her? For the most part, like, she liked Ianthe when she was there. So Rhys lets her into his mind and shows her a scene from his own past where Ianthe showed up in his bedroom and tried to like coerce him into sleeping with her. She was like literally waiting there naked in his bed when he got there, and he was livid about it. She really was like trying to use him and take advantage of him sexually, and he was absolutely not having it. Feyre realizes that he hates Ianthe for the exact thing that he sacrificed himself to Amarantha with for 50 years, which kind of really puts in perspective what a sacrifice it was for him again. So now that they know that Feyre can detect these objects, their next move is they need to go to the human realm. Remember now that her sisters are living in that big beautiful estate that Tamlin provided for them. So they need to go there and get the sisters to let them have their meeting with the human queens there as like a neutral meeting ground. When they arrive at the estate, Rhys glamours everyone to be invisible except for Feyre. Elaine fawns over her immediately, which is to be expected, and Nesta is so rude to her, which is also to be expected because that's sort of like both of their personalities in a nutshell. When she walks in, she has a hood on, so they can't tell right away that she's a fairy because they don't know that yet. And eventually she takes her hood off and they're both absolutely shocked. Even Elaine seems kind of taken aback and like a little bit scared that she's a fairy and like doesn't seem as welcoming to her. So she tells them, I need you to listen. She tells them the whole story, start to finish, and exactly what she needs from them. But Elaine seems to get it and she sees the urgency of it, and she convinces Nesta to let them do it. She gets all of the servants out of the house and sends them home, and then lets Feyre bring Rhysand and Asriel and Cassian inside. Once they finally let the other three inside, Rhys releases the glamours that he has on them and they come in, and Nesta basically forces them to sit down and eat dinner because their dinner was ready. Cassian is very much upset with the two sisters for the way they treated Feyre before she left for Prythian. Nesta also gets very upset with Feyre because Feyre doesn't look particularly excited to eat the food, and Feyre says the food is just different in the human realm, and Nesta takes that as her saying it's not good enough, and she gets really mad about that, and then they all argue a whole bunch and they eat a really awkward dinner. And then Feyre, Cassian, Az, and Rhysand stay up very late crafting a letter to the queens to convince them to come there to meet them. Nesta sets them all up with bedrooms, and Rhys specifies that he wants 2 bedrooms that are right next to each other and that each one should be able to sleep 2 people in 2 separate beds, but they don't have any that are like that, so they just put them in 2 bedrooms that are like one big bed. So she has to sleep in the bedroom, she thinks, in the bed with Rhys at this point, and she's like, oh god, now what? But when they get in there, after they've crafted this letter and it's been time to go to bed and everybody's exhausted, she goes to wash up, and when she comes back, Rhys has a cot that he obviously popped out of nowhere with his magic powers, and he warmed up her bed with his magic, and he's beyond respectful, quite the gentleman, and she has nothing to worry about. So the next morning they stay for breakfast and then they plan to go home. But before breakfast, Feyre goes out into the woods with Rhys and she wants to practice her magic powers a little bit. Once she's out there, she's having a really hard time, and she tells Rhys to go away and let her do it on her own, which doesn't help. She's still having a really hard time. But shortly thereafter, something comes up behind her, scoops her up and grabs her and tries to kill her. Rhys is there in a heartbeat because, you know, he probably knew the whole time and was watching from afar anyway. It was the Adder, and the Adder had come to collect Feyre because the King of Hybern is looking for her. Rhys straps him up to a tree, Asriel hauls him off for questioning, and Feyre is so pissed because she's like, wow, you knew this was gonna happen and you let me be out here by myself as bait. In her great anger, starts to be able to use her powers against Rhys. At one point, she actually is so mad that she figures out how to winnow real quick. Like, she only goes a couple of feet, but that's it. She winds up eventually catching him, which takes her a really long time. She lands on top of him. She's like, ooh, God, we're too close. Ooh, boy, oh my, the muscled body underneath me. And she's like all hot and bothered. She tells him to never, ever, ever do that again or she won't work for him. And he's like, you know what? You're right. That's fair. And they have a healthy argument and discussion, and they move on about their lives. They have breakfast with the sisters and then they head into the village. Obviously, the fairies are glamored so that nobody can see them, but they want to make sure that the sisters send the letter off to the human queens right away, and it is time for them to head back home. Why does this happen to me? Does this happen to any of you guys? You go to squeeze your lashes into place and the whole goddamn thing just comes off. Ugh! Rhys goes to question the adder with Azriel. And while he's gone, she's like super worried about his safety. Now, this really mirrors her pattern that she had with Tamlin as well. We started to see when she was more romantically interested in Tamlin that she suddenly was so concerned for his safety. Adder lets out a bunch of information, most of it which they already knew, but they also find out that Tamlin closed his borders, which makes Feyre worried for what's going on down there. So she asks Rhys to show her what the city is like at nighttime because he keeps saying how spectacular Velaris is at night. So the whole crew goes out to dinner. They go to this little restaurant that's by the river. The river's called the Sidra, and the restaurants are like backed up onto the river. And even in the winter, they're like warmed with magic so that you can sit outside and dine al fresco. The chef also brings out some food for Amren, which we find out is blood. So that is the mystery of what Amren actually eats. Feyre also gives Amren her amulet back during this outing and finds out that it was a gift from Rhys originally, and that it never actually had any magic, that Amren just gave it to her as a way to trick her into having more confidence and making her go in, and it wasn't actually the way she escaped at all. After dinner, they all want to go out dancing, and Feyre doesn't really want to go. She's not super interested in going out dancing, so she's hoping that somebody else doesn't want to go too, so Rhys walks home with her for the night, and the whole city is beautiful, and there's lights, and Velaris has like a rainbow that's permanently lit up over the city, and it's just absolutely stunning. They walk home together, they talk a lot, they talk about life, they talk about family. It's super, super romantic. As they're walking, she hears a very familiar song in the air, and she realizes that it's the song that she heard coming into her jail cell in the first book that was like so beautiful and like brought her back from the brink of not being able to handle her emotions anymore. And she says to Rhys, I know this song, and then realizes that he sent that song into her cell. And then she says that during listening to that song, she had seen the House of Wind, and he says that he didn't send her that part. And she's like, whoa, that's pretty weird. So she asks why he sent the music, and he said that he could tell that she was about to break, and he was just trying to do anything he could to help her keep it together. He is so fucking cute and sweet. I love him. Feyre finally, after a really long time coming, thanks him for all that he's done for her, which I think that she should have done earlier, but better late than never. And that night, for the first time in a really long time, she sleeps with no nightmares. The next day is the start of her training with Cassian. Cassian is a very tough trainer. Cassian tries to get her to talk about her letter to Tamlin, but like he does it in a shitty way, trying to make a joke, and she does not take it as a joke, and she gets mad. She makes some comment about him and Mor and their relationship and stuff, because there's like a weird love triangle between Mor and Cassian and Azriel. The whole time she's like ruminating in her own mind about like what she did wrong, how blind she was in her relationship with Tamlin. She thinks about how it should have been her killed instead of the other fairies that were there, and she starts sobbing in the middle of their training. Rhys sees her crying, and he comes over and he wraps her up in his wings, and he surrounds her with like pretty stars that he makes with his magic, and he makes her feel better. And again, he's just generally a fucking delight, and I love him. Rhys had told them that there was going to be news from the summer court. He lets them know that they did in fact get the invite, and they are going to go to the summer court to get half half of this damn book, but the only ones going are going to be Feyre, Amren, and Rhys. At this point, she's flirting with Rhys like really hard. Like she's getting bold about it. So Rhys winnows them all to the summer court. And when they get to the court, it's absolutely beautiful. It's warm. It's just a beautiful city. She kind of can't believe how beautiful these places are, but the summer court is in the process of rebuilding because unlike Velaris, they were affected by Amarantha. When they arrive, she remembers the High Lord of the Summer Court, whose name is Tarquin, from underneath the mountain. She does a very calculated thing and flirts with Tarquin in order to get on his good side, but he's like kind of not buying it. He's a beautiful man too, by the way. She describes him as very beautiful. He has like brown skin and turquoise eyes. Tarquin's sister Cressida is also there, and she is very skeptical of Feyre and keeps saying that she better not be on the run from Tamlin because they will absolutely send her ass back to the Spring Court. So Tarquin says that they'll talk business later, but for now he's gonna throw them a party on his pleasure barge. Rhys goes into Feyre's room and they talk a little bit about the reason that he feels like it's gonna be difficult to steal the book is because he actually likes these people. And he seems like he's a little bit butthurt that Feyre was flirting with Tarquin. So the barge party happens. She spends most of the night talking to Tarquin. And although she's like fake flirting with him, she does say that she thinks it would be easy to fall in love with a man like him because not only is he beautiful, but he's also a really kind ruler. And they really connect on the fact that they both kind of think that there should be less of a separation between high fae and lesser fairies. So she starts to feel really upset that she has to steal from him because she thinks that they could be like genuine friends and allies. But during the party, while she's talking to Tarquin, Rhys is over in the corner talking to Cressida, and Cressida is all over him. She's sitting in his lap, she's brushing his arms, and she's like making it really clear that she wants to sleep with him. And Feyre gets really upset. She walks away. She spends most of the rest of the night standing at the end of the pleasure barge, just looking off at the city and thinking, not even really realizing that she was waiting for Rhys to come find her, but he doesn't. And Feyre is really upset about the Cressida thing, but she's also very happy to feel sad in a way because it's almost like she's just grateful that she's starting to feel emotions at all because she had been very void and empty. Long story short, Rhys never comes to find her. She's convinced that he goes off with Cressida, and that, my friends, is where we leave off for this half of the book. That brings us to the end of chapter 33. Will they get half the book of breathings by stealing it from them? Did Rhys sleep with Cressida? Will Feyre and Rhysand fall in love? I accidentally left us on such a cliffhanger. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. First of all, I love this palette. I cannot believe how pretty this look is. These are by far the best NYX pressed shadows I have ever used. As always, I will list all of the products I use down below in the description. I know I put them up on the screen, but in case you missed something or you're just curious, you want to just like be able to click a link, they are down there below. Please leave me a comment down below. Let me know who is your favorite character so far. Now that we've met all of the fine folks from the Night Court, personally, I've made it very clear that I love Rhys to death, but I love Mor so much. I think that she's just so awesome. Please don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoy this series because that really helps me out and I always appreciate it, especially because we're trying to do something a little bit new here on this channel. So leaving a like lets me know that you're enjoying this type of content and that I should continue making more. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe because I would love to have you around for more videos, whether it's for the makeup and books type of thing or you're just here for the regular makeup tutorials, but admittedly there are a lot more of those going on. So much for hanging out with me while I get ready today and talk about books. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, feel free to leave me a comment and let me know if there are any books that you would like to suggest for the series going forward. I think we might do one more book in this series, but I do want to switch it up and jump to another series soon and then maybe come back to this one just to keep the content fresh. So if you have any specific suggestions that you think I would love, please let me know in a comment down below because I would love to hear it. I think that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate each and every one of you spending some time with me, and I will see you in the next one.